Welcome to the fifth episode of Stuck in the Middle. In this fifth episode of the podcast, we discuss the lessons for the post-pandemic world. Best-selling author Fareed Zakaria talks about 10 lessons for a post-pandemic world. And obviously, all of us have found ourselves stuck in the middle. Many times we found ourselves in an ambivalent position. And my former professor, psychologist, M.T. Paul, always says it's an indecisive stand. We're not able to take a stand. Is the Supreme Court ruling in the US correct on abortions, not abortions? Should we lock down or should we open up the economy? An issue that some of our guests are very familiar today. Should we have English as the medium of instruction or should we have a national language in order to connect us to the roots as the medium of instructions? Many times we have found ourselves in the middle. But Margaret Thatcher, the former British Prime Minister, once said, standing in the middle without taking a stand, you risk getting knocked down by a car. So here we are trying to debate, trying to discuss, trying to find some sense in how we should go about in the future. To handle this podcast, episode 5, what are the lessons for a post-pandemic world? We could have no better than Tan Sri Noor Hisham, who kind of was the face of Malaysia's fight against the COVID-19 pandemic crisis. Every single day we were able to see him on television. And of course, along with him, we have Professor David Whitford, who's the Vice-Chancellor of University of Cyberjaya. We didn't want it to sound too academic or too regulatory, so we thought we'll bring someone out from the world of arts. And therefore, we have award-winning actress Sangeetha, who acted in the movie Juang, which reflected the aspirations of the common person during the pandemic. So here we are, and I'm just going to go straight on to the subject. The first question, we will just have Tan Sri Noor handle that question. In this podcast, we talk a lot about the pandemic, but then Fareed Zakaria said in his book, quoting Lenin, he said, there are 3 decades where nothing happens, and then there are 3 weeks when 3 decades happen. My father told me that he lost 5 years of his life in World War II. I thought it will never happen in my life, but I did lose it during the COVID pandemic crisis. I remember coming to our campus, the University of Cyberjaya, and this is a campus built for 12,000 students, and 3 of us were on campus. So many times I tell our Chancellor, Tan Sri Noor Hisham, how painful it was at that time. So, Tan Sri,
yes,
while the coronavirus is behind us,
right,
and we have crossed the threshold,
yes,
can I just ask you 2 quick questions?
Right.
One, how was your experience in managing the pandemic crisis? And 2, what's the future out there in the post-pandemic world? Are we well prepared for a next pandemic? To you,
thank you very much for the opportunity. I think during the pandemic is a very challenging for all of us, and we do not have much experience handling a pandemic. The last pandemic was more than 100 years ago. So when we were faced with this pandemic, we see a lot of gaps in our health system. And certainly, I think in the crisis, we need to learn from this opportunity and how best to improve. We need to leverage on this lesson learned to improve and strengthen our healthcare system. So at that point of time, I think we need to strike a balance between health and livelihood. And we need to look into the virus. We know that the virus is, transmissible and very high fatality, and plus a lot of economic impact because of the virus spreading like wildfire. Because of that, WHO have announced public health emergency of international concern, whereby transmissibility is very high, fatality is very high, and a high economic impact. Now, when the virus spread to our shore, how do you fight a war when you do not have enough diagnostic tool? Our capacity to diagnose at that point of time from 29 labs in 2020 is only maximum 3,000 PCR tests a day. Then second is that we do not have a vaccine available. And we do not have therapeutics medicine available to treat. So how do you fight a war without vaccine, without medicine? The only solution that we have then is the public health measures, prevention and preparedness, so that we can use public health measures in terms of prevention as well as control of the disease. So how do we do that? So I think we have learned from the lesson, and as the chairman of the Standing Committee of Health Emergency Prevention, Preparedness and Response in Geneva under WHO, we have come up with a simplified strategy in terms of just a simplified 5C. The first C is collaboration in surveillance. We need member states to share information of the virus. If we do not know about what virus, and how are we going to protect our shore? How do we going to strengthen our border if we do not know how to diagnose the virus? So that's number one. Unless information been shared, we can get our lab ready and do the testing, diagnose. Once we can diagnose, we can isolate the positive cases and those who have exposed the positive cases. Second is in terms of clinical scale up. We have seen China can build a 10,000 beds hospital in 10 days. Malaysia, we do not have the capacity, but we have creative ideas and innovation. We can convert an exhibition hall to a field hospital with 10,000 beds in 7 days. So I think this is something that we have learned, and this is very innovative in terms of approach, and we have used all the main halls to become field hospital. Why? Because our hospital already congested even before the pandemic. So that is the second lesson. Third is the community empowerment. Third C is a community empowerment. How do we empower the community in change of behavior, for example? So we must engage with the community, communicate with them, to highlight, to explain issues and challenges, and also manage the expectation of our community. Because we are not only fighting with the virus. Remember, we are also fighting with the viral of the social media, fake news, disinformation and misinformation, creating a lot of fear in the community. So that's the reason why we have a risk communication daily to engage with the public and answer all the questions. The first thing that we do, listen to the fear of the public and how to address the fear in the social media, in the press conference and etc. Then again, the fourth C is countermeasures. And we do know, because even though we have an International Health Regulation 2005, it shows that there's gaps in terms of the implementation, whereby a rich country buy all the vaccine and medicine, and the poor country is left without access to affordable vaccine and medicine. Now I think WHO is looking into the pandemic accord to see how best we can distribute in terms of the accessibility, affordability and equity of the vaccine. Last but not least, in cooperation in mobilization. So we can see, for example, one state is involved, in terms of high risk of cases being diagnosed, we can mobilize our personnel from other states, equipment and etc. to that particular state. We also need to look into the cooperation in terms of regional cooperation. If one country is involved, we can mobilize assistance from other countries to assist. So this 5C has been agreed upon by many member states, and hopefully we can implement. The implementation is the issue. So we have learned a lot from this crisis. And in Malaysia, for example, we also learn in terms of working together as a team, the whole of government and whole of society approach. In the past, we have a lot of silo in one department, one ministry, public sector and the private sector. But during the pandemic, we see collaboration from both sides. More than 1,500 medical staff from the private sector crossed over pro bono to assist the Ministry of Health. And then COVID cases were referred to Sungai Buloh Hospital. Non-COVID cases, we refer to the private hospital. So you see the complementary services that being provided by both sectors. At the end of the day, we are not looking at sectors, we are looking into the whole spectrum of optimize our resources in the country to combat COVID-19. I think these are some of the experience that we have learned. And what is more important now, we need to repair the roof when the sun is shining. You know, in Malay saying that sediakan payung sebelum hujan. So now, although we are out of the pandemic, we need to sit down together, you know, have a framework of, preparedness, and also discuss how we can be prepared, and also coordinating the public sector and private sector. So this is very important for us. My fear today is that although we are out of the public health emergency of international concern, my fear is that we have forgotten about the pandemic. And if we have forgotten about the pandemic, we'll repeat history again, you know, the do's and don'ts, and etc. So these are some of the things that I hope, you know, we can come together and look into. If we want to fight a war, we need to be trained to fight the war. And this is the time for that come together and look into preparedness and and prevention. So these are some of the things that we have learned from the crisis.
Thank you, Tan Sri. I know you said that some countries hogged all the vaccines.
Exactly.
And then, of course, after the crisis was over, they had to actually destroy it or do whatever, because they didn't have a need for it. And I think Farid Zakaria spends one whole chapter in the book. He says the inequality will get worse if we are not careful, if we don't repair the roof. So having said that, I still remember what you used to say every time on television: masking, washing your hands, and there's one more thing.
Yeah, this community empowerment, basically we try to avoid the 3 C's, you know, close conversation, confined space, and then congested places, you know. And then we embrace 3W, hand washing, wear a mask, and warn the public in certain areas, for example. The 3 W's, embrace 3W, avoid the 3 C's. So these are simple messages that we, you know, shared with the public daily, so that we can change the behavior of the public. So make sure that they can comply.
It's interesting because I went through most part of the crisis era or whatever without getting into trouble. And then came April 2022. I went to New Delhi, and then when I went into New Delhi, I was supposed to do a test here, and on landing do a test, and then do a test when I depart New Delhi, and then do another test when I actually come here. And I was clean, so I thought, oh, all right, I'm good, I'm strong. So I decided to go for a function, and I just did something terrible. I didn't wear my mask, and it was a congested area, and the guy next to me was a carrier. So I went through my first episode of getting into trouble, COVID, So, Prof, just to follow up with Tan Sri's question, Tan Sri said we must actually prepare the roof when it's not raining, not when it's raining. So having said that, being a Vice-Chancellor of a university with years of experience in different countries all over the world, how well do you think are our professionals prepared for the future? How our doctors currently studying medicine, pharmacy, nursing, etc. How well do you think they will be prepared for the future, or how well structured is our curriculum?
That's a very good question, because I think, like Tan Sri is referring to, that it may well be that we very quickly miss the lessons that we've learned during the pandemic. Certainly during the pandemic, it was quite amazing how quickly higher education took on online teaching and learning and that side of things. But it also taught us some lessons during that period of time, of things that you can't actually even start to accommodate during a pandemic, such as some of the social side of human relationships, which are seriously lost. And I think some of that is quite important. The impact on even training doctors, the loss of training and skills that they had during that period of time was quite marked, and we'll yet to see whether it carries on during their life or whether they catch up with that. But that probably in earlier life education was even a bigger impact in terms of young people, and whether generationally that's going to have an impact later, and whether we've actually accommodated for that, which I don't think we have actually. The understanding of that those generations of very young children, there's not been the compensation, as it were, for their education or their loss of education that we saw during the pandemic. And we've yet to see what impact that has on students coming into higher education in the future. But in terms of where we're at in terms of doctor training, which is what I've been involved in, I'm a great believer really that most things are evolutionary rather than revolutionary, in the sense that we don't see really rapid change due to things even like the pandemic. We forget very quickly the impact of it. I think in higher education that's already sort of happened, that we're back into the mode of just continuing the way that we were before the pandemic. The curriculum probably hasn't got any new areas in, which it should have, on pandemic response and the like, which we know that the likelihood of further pandemics like this is increasing because of our globalization, the fact that our proximity to wildlife and so on, which is the zoonotic spread is actually greater because of the population of the world, and the fact that cities have sort of encroached on natural habitats a bit more. And so the chance of a pandemic now is actually greater, I think, in the next 20, 30 years than it was 100 years ago. So we're slowly seeing that, but I can't see that we've actually changed the medical curriculum significantly in terms of what we're training students on. And the public health approach probably has incorporated elements of the pandemic response into it in terms of infectious diseases, but certainly dealing with a pandemic was thought to be a fairly unique situation. Whether it will continue to be unique, we've yet to see, but it's certainly something that I think will probably continue a lot quicker. So as far as medical education is concerned, I don't think it's significantly changed. And so we have lessons to learn in that area.
Just a quick question before we go to Sangeetha, because every time in the podcast series we talk about the psychology of something. So today I think it's largely, to me, what interests me is the psychology of fear. Mm-hmm. I think during the pandemic it was fear which was far greater than really something happening.
Yeah.
You know, so so how do you think we are well prepared, maybe Tan Sri and the Prof, to manage the psychology of fear if this happens in future?
I don't think we've, well, again, I doubt that we've significantly changed. I think the other psychology that comes into it is probably as strong as the psychology of fear, which is the psychology of behavioral change. Sure. And so when we're sort of dealing with individuals and populations, changing behaviors is probably one of the most difficult things that we can do. We've all experienced it. If you try and get more exercise, if you try and change your diet, it's a struggle until you get into the habit of it and so on. And that is, I suppose, the difficulty with counterbalancing against the psychology of fear, is that it's not something that happens regularly so that we can change and become a habit in our lives. The only way of really cementing behavioral change into our lives is when it becomes consistent and a habit. If a pandemic were to happen every 20, 30 years even, so that we would have memory of it, it's unlikely that the habitual sort of nature of it would have been so ingrained in us in the previous pandemic that we'd actually be able to take the lessons learned into the next one. So behavioral change is a major factor in dealing
That's why
with
Tan Sri always says, next time you want to drink a teh tarik, think twice. That's the first step, yeah. But I always say, well, just today, yeah. Tomorrow I will stop it, but just today let me drink the teh tarik. But it doesn't stop. I was in the UK and somebody said Malaysia has got one of the most serious problems of diabetes, right? Yeah. So Sangeetha, we'll go to you. I know in the movie Juang, right?
Yes.
Right. There were 4 episodes of it, right? One was a policeman struggling with coping with the enforcing regulation. Whenever Tan Sri said it's a lockdown on television, how does he enforce it? Number 2 was Doctors and nurses, okay. And number 3 was a family struggling, yeah, a B40 family struggling. And the last was the Chinese guy where you're transporting him on a plane, right? Evacuating, right? Evacuating. And nobody wants to wait for him because he's late or something. Tell us a little bit about your experiences from the other side. So we heard the champion against the crisis, an educator, and now yourself, right on the other side, reflecting the riot's aspirations into a screenplay.
Wow, that's a lot of credit for me. But thank you so much. Firstly, I am so honored to be in so much profoundness today. And these are, I suppose, very important conversations that we don't usually have in the film industry per se, because we are so busy trying to make art, you know. But then this was one of the biggest lessons that I learned during the pandemic was, especially when we did Juang, you know, it was when they say art imitates life, you know, which is what we were doing when we were filming Juang. So it was very difficult for us in the film industry because in the film industry, we are social animals, right? We work in big sets with people, you know, even as actors, we're with people. We need to practice with, we have to be face to face with everyone, you know. So the pandemic, it just turned everything upside down on its head for us because, so then here I was, personally as an actor, at home, trying to be a cinematographer, trying to be a director, trying to act in something. And we were pushed to this because Malaysia, in that sense, our film industry in Malaysia, in that sense, we're not used to shooting on virtual productions or sound stages or in studios. We're used to filming in actual locations. So if it's like a kampung, you know, a kampung house, it's an actual kampung house in Semenye or Dengkil or something, you know. And when all of this was taken away from us, we then, you know, what came to us at that time was obviously human resilience. What do we do at this time to survive? Because the film industry, I think, I may be wrong, but it was one of the hardest hit industries in the world, even in Hollywood, you know, because we were just not prepared for this, you know. And here we were just having to work with machines, giving ourselves instructions. And then it came to this point where we shot film Juang. It's an anthology, and it had 5 different directors shooting at different locations. And this is the first time this is happening as well. So in Juang, I play a food delivery person, which was one of the most important frontliners in the country at that time. And in the beginning, when I went to read the script, I thought they were going to ask me to play a doctor or a nurse or something, you know. And I was like, wow, we just came out of the pandemic. Maybe I don't want to attach myself too much with this because I'm also mentally affected. I can be an actor, right? But I can't fake it all the time. Maybe I'm mentally affected as well. But when I saw the script and I'm playing a food delivery person, I want to do this, you know, because I know how hard they worked and how important they were for the people in that sense, you know. So I wanted to represent that. But the shooting conditions were very difficult. It was very challenging because we had to do the tests every day, and it's the first time in my life, you know, I mean, as actors, we need our faces to express and do everything, to speak, you know, communication and everything, but I had to wear a mask through the whole movie. It was difficult. It was very difficult because I'm trying to communicate. As actors, we are trained to communicate, and we had to do it with, I mean, I don't know, maybe I got lucky, I have big eyes. It worked during that time because my face was covered all the way up to here, you know. So it was very difficult for me personally because I couldn't communicate with my actors. We had to do the whole distancing, as Tan Sri had advised all of us to do, and we so adhered to at that time. It was very difficult. But then we also saw a huge shift in how the industry worked during that time. As you can see, you know, it accelerated virtual productions, and FINAS has now set it up in FINAS itself. We have it now. So because as filmmakers, if we didn't follow the trend of what's happening with technology at that time, then we're going to be left behind.
So what you're saying is we can learn from a difficult situation.
Yes. I think in the film industry, I'm a sanguine. I like to take things in a positive way. Yes, we were affected. One perhaps, if I were to share, one of the setbacks that we had was, as Tan Sri was mentioning earlier as well, a lot of things shifted to social media. So it came to a point where a lot of filmmakers started thinking that social media influencers had power over audiences, So they started casting, we were all forgotten for a while, and they started casting social media influencers to play roles in films, which didn't really work out after some time. But that was the shift as well, because people started going into the fact that, if they have followers, then it means that people listen to them, and our tickets will sell and all of these things, right? So that happened in a way. I suppose we learned from that as well, because that was not successful. It was not a successful venture. There were a lot of movies that were made that didn't do very well. But then there was also this whole shift from going to the cinema, because you couldn't go to the cinema, right? You couldn't buy tickets to watch movies. So you ended up watching cinema coming to your home, which then put us on a platform where we are now competing with content from all over the world. So if we are not going to up our game in terms of creating the kind of content that is going to be competitive enough, then we're going to be set back again, right? So I think it in all of those, in the perspective of what happened and what we learned from, I think there was a lot of things in that sense that pushed us to learn and to sort of like become better in what we do, so we're not left behind.
There were three things that I learned, Tan Sri, from that movie, the anthology, which I'm sure that you had that experience of negotiating when to lock down and when to open up, which was a nightmare at that time. One was fear. So lots and lots of people were just so fearful of what's next going to happen. And I remember my 92-year-old mother at that time telling me isolation was the biggest problem that she had, because she was so lonely and she was so depressed. She didn't know what else to do. And third, I met a lot of young people. The Grab industry actually grew out of that. That kind of a situation. But there was this young Malay boy who delivered food to us, and I felt so sad that I gave him a 10 ringgit tip, and I saw his face smile, and I asked him what was his biggest problem, and he said, I really don't know what to do. Purposelessness was one of the biggest problems. So it was fear, isolation, purposelessness. In the context of this, Hansi, there's this guy called Peter Daszak. He's an eminent disease ecologist, and he kept on saying that every day we do things in the world that we make pandemics more likely. You see, we are doing so much harm to nature that we are doing something terrible, And then there was this Nobel Prize winner, Joshua Lederberg, the biologist, for his work on bacterial genetics in 1989. He was supposed to have said that we have changed our biological trajectory so much that contemporary man is a man-made species. While he said our continued scientific advancement is commendable, we are the greatest threat to the planet and animal species. In the end, he said, we may have one competitor, and unfortunately that competitor could be the virus and it could win. And so how do we balance this kind of psychological issues plus dynamism with safety? Because I know, Tan Sri, you would always say at that time, please remember this 1 week, try to keep indoors. It's good for you, good for others, but people will still try to steal ways and means of doing. How do we balance the psychological issues, dynamism and safety?
I think most important during that period of time, we must manage and mitigate the fear, and the fear of the unknown actually. So we in the Ministry of Health then, we have to fall back on the facts, science and data. And more important is the risk communication. Having a PC, for example, explain all the issues and challenges and listen to the concern of the public in social media. But I do not answer, but at least I know what they are talking about, the fear that they have. And we address the fear based on science again. And obviously, if you can explain the issues and challenges well in a very simple language, so that the kampung folks, Aceh, also understand your language, not using academic language, but it's a very simple messaging and even communication with them. And you manage the fear, you manage the expectation, and then slowly you build trust. This is the important. Once you have a public trust, then you can actually share with them the do's and don'ts. This is why we need to make the public realize what they can do, what they have to avoid, and etc. Very simple messaging. And because not only, during the pandemic, it's not only the responsibility of the Ministry of Health and the government, but each and every individual and family have a role to play. And this role that we must educate them and make sure that they can protect themselves, take preventive measures. This is what we wanted, because if they do not comply to the preventive measures, and then the virus will spread like wildfire. So I think we have actually continued to engage, and more important is that simple messaging, the do's and don'ts, and we give some incentive. For example, when we have a lockdown, we allow the head of the family to go out to buy food and etc. So if you have been vaccinated, we give you allowance in terms of to access to certain places and etc. And take precautionary measures. I think that is the key. So if you understand the disease and you understand the situation, to avoid from getting infection, because we do not have vaccine then. But we realize that, preventive measures is one, but if you have the vaccine, then at least your body have the antibody to fight the virus. So that is why I think at the end of the day, we want our economy, our border to open up as soon as possible, and we need to get the vaccination program going. If we can vaccinate 80 to 90% of population, and hopefully we'll achieve herd immunity. And once you have achieved herd immunity, we can open up our border, and also economy can return back to normal. I think this is the very challenging time, but I think the key is that risk communication, engaging with the public, give assurance and mitigate the fear factor. And this is a thing that we are doing it daily, and slowly, without realizing, you're changing the behavior of the public. And this is why putting on a mask. Well, before the pandemic, we see people in Japan or in China, when they put on a mask, we ask ourselves, why do they put on a mask? But now we know why. If you have infection, fever, make sure you stay at home. But if you need to go out, put on a mask so that you protect others from getting infection, right? So I think these are some of the good behavior skills, and we should continue to inculcate in our public. So I think there's a lot of challenges, but I think if we come together and then we can share the information and they can move forward.
Right. Yeah, I think, I agree with the trust issue of the public. I think there's also sort of cultural issues. What we saw across the world was a difference in approach from, say, Southeast Asia to Europe and the US, and certainly the UK and the US, which are countries that I'm from, were, to be quite honest, quite disastrous responses to the pandemic at the beginning. And but part of that was cultural, and it was when I was sort of starting off, I was talking to my medical students, all of whom were wearing masks. Everybody in the malls were wearing masks. I was sending pictures back to the UK where nobody was wearing masks, and I asked some of our medical students, why are you wearing masks? And they were wearing it because there was still a very strong family culture. They said, I've got a grandmother, I've got an aunt at home, and it's concern for those other people. Whereas I think, more from my culture, it's very much more an individualistic, please don't tell me what to do sort of approach. And so there is that sort of element in it as well. And I think the other thing that happened around that time was if the messages that came out to the public were, as Tan Sri is saying, very simple and also evidence-based, it was very good. Some of the messages that came out in some of the Western countries were a bit bizarre at times, and so the public lost trust in experts at that time as well. And that's been an evolutionary thing, I think, over a period of time, but it's been quite pronounced. If you look at the trust in doctors post-pandemic in the US, it's plummeted.
I can't remember which country it was, but there was a country where the president said, you just need to take a pesticide and it'll be all cured.
President Donald Trump.
And I didn't mention the name. And you had the chief of the disease control, Fauci, scrambling up to defend.
Exactly.
So that was it. And in Malaysia, I think there was a lot on the social media where you have to take ivermectin or something like that. Yeah. And I remember texting Tan Sri, and Tan Sri said, just relax. Yeah, don't do anything just based on social media. Yeah.
I agree completely with Prof. The sort of I mean, the image of the cultural aspect of it was very obvious. And I was, I mean, during that time, I still remember calling a friend of mine in India, and he was going for a party. This is during the pandemic, and I'm like, I was so proud of Malaysians at that time, because everybody was following orders. They were taking orders like, yeah, we're doing this and we're going to do this together, and they were proud of it. But yeah, I completely agree with that point. It's very different if you look at it from all this perspective, because I have friends from all over the world, and the way they sort of took how much seriously they took about what was happening. It was also about acting conscientiously. It's about having civic mindedness. People followed it, and till today you see it. It's made people better people. For me, wearing a mask was like, till today I do it for fun, because I don't want to dress up every time I go out, and I don't want people to know I'm here.
So I think
it's not weird anymore.
Tan Sri was talking about trust.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that Farid Zakaria talks in this book, in managing the psychology of fear and being prepared for a future world, is that it's the quality of government, not the quantity of government. And he just mentioned some things controversial. He says democracies are better in managing pandemics than dictatorships because of the flow of information. The more you share, the more you are able to manage the crisis. And I think one of the things he says is, you can't manage a global disease with a local response. You have to share, you have to collaborate, like what Tan Sri said, the 5 C's. So moving forward, Tan Sri, would you like to summarize 3 things for us to be prepared for a future post-pandemic world?
Thank you very much. So, in fact, I have 5 things to share, what we have learned from this pandemic COVID-19. Number 1 is technology. We need to embrace technology. And AI, for example, we have a super app, and that was very helpful for us to track, trace, and etc. So, number 2, I think we need to come up with creative ideas and innovation during the pandemic to solve the problems that we have. And number 3, I think most important, not taught in medical school, risk communication. Communicate using simple language, and then you can change the behavior of people, by just simple messaging, simple communication. And number 4 is perseverance in what we do. For example, every day without fail, we will remind the people to do this, 3 C's and 3W, avoid the 3 C's and embrace the 3W. And last but not least is adaptability, in terms of it's not the strongest and most intelligent will survive. It is the one that adaptable to the environment at that point of time will survive. So these are the 5 things I think we learn from this, and then we continue to embrace it, and perhaps we now look into our preventive measures and control. It will enhance and strengthen the way we react and respond to pandemic.
Thank you so much, Tan Sri. Prof?
Yeah, I just had one thing, which is probably that, as I was alluding to before, the development and the teaching and of soft skills to young people so that they persevere through life, because the resilience to survive, the adaptability, as Tan Sri has called it, to survive through a pandemic is a skill. And many of our other skills, such as communication and team working and all those sort of other elements that are soft skills, are just so much more important in this day and age when knowledge is so easily available. So that when the next pandemic comes around, if people are more prepared with those skills, they're more likely to survive through them.
Thank you, Prof.
I think, because there was an accelerated online learning you know. We've also become a lot more skilled in the film industry to catch up with all the technologies that are available in the world right now to make better movies. There was also a shift in the kind of in the genre of movies people have been watching. The humanity-based drama sort of films are doing really well. And I'm working on a very important project, on a very important piece of history of Malaysia. And I'm hoping that as Malaysian filmmakers, you know, we would advance ourselves to be more competitive and meet the demands and needs
There are
of...
more movies in recent times in geriatric and healthcare. So I think one of the things that I wanted to just bring from the financial sector, not from the healthcare sector, is a saying from Warren Buffett, who said, it's not the smartest who will survive, but it's one who's most disciplined. And I always remember this during the pandemic crisis, that you just got to be disciplined. So if you want to wear a mask, wear a mask. If you want to sanitize, you make sure you use your sanitizer. And I know that there were many challenges with the vaccines, but you still need to get vaccinated. I remember texting a mutual friend of ours, Sanjeev Joshi, and saying, should I take the vaccine? He said, you must, and the must was in capitals. Yeah. So forget about everything else. So we just went on there. And number two is, it's one of the things that I learned from the movie Juang is empathy. And I think it's something very important to manage psychology of fear, isolation, or purposelessness, is managing, understanding empathy, not just sympathy. And I think that's the lesson that I took away from that movie. But sometimes I wish that movie had done better, because I thought it did well, but I thought it could have been a blockbuster. People always like movies, horror and paranoia, rather than something.
I think when we speak about psychology, I think because we had come out of that at that time, and everybody wanted to move away from it as fast as they could. So when we made the film, we said this is a piece of history that's going to be etched forever. If we make it into a film, it's going to be there forever. So it is for us to remember 10 years, 20 years to come, so we don't forget, you know. So we've documented it for you, you know. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think it's also important that what Farid Zakaria says in this book, it's no more going to be the missile that's going to destroy the world. It's going to be that tiny, microscopic, thousands of times smaller than the head of the pin, deadly pathogens, man-made or natural, could trigger a health crisis. And it's ironical that President Barack Obama talked about it 5 years earlier. And he said, what happens if something can be transmitted through the air? So, thank you so much, Tan Sri, for being here, and Prof being here, and Sangeetha being here. But at the end of the day, the most important thing for the future, how well prepared we are. I think going back to what Tan Sri said, the 5 C's, and what Farid Zakaria said, buckle up. And we all need to buckle up and be ready for the future, and to realize and recognize that's in our hands to be ready for the future. Thank you. Thank you very much.